Climate change is a global issue. Across the world, many are concerned about how we achieve a zero carbon future which mitigates the damage done so far to our planet. We know we need concerted global action, but it's also a local challenge. So what do we have to do if we are to make our contribution to tackling the climate crisis? We might change how we do things on a personal level by making greener, more sustainable choices to reduce our carbon footprint. But one key area where we need a partnership approach is the energy associated with our homes, as it's reckoned that 20% of all carbon emissions can be directly attributed to housing. There are two key areas when we think about energy in housing. First are the new houses being built and the regulatory standards that we set to improve their energy performance. Second is our existing housing stock and how we can retrofit it to make it more energy efficient. It has been estimated by the Scottish Government that as much as 80% of all the houses that will exist in 2045 are already built. In other words, we must urgently take up the challenge of retrofitting our existing housing to make homes more energy efficient. In Glasgow, the host city for COP26, we have more than 75,000 pre-1919 sandstone tenement buildings. These properties contain multiple flats and make up about a fifth of Glasgow's homes. They are an iconic part of Glasgow's cityscape and a popular choice for people to live in. But they are terrible carbon emitters, with heating lost through their sandstone walls, sash windows, roofs and floors. This is a video about how we create a blueprint to revamp our tenements to modern energy efficiency standards. This has to be done sensitively, but we can't afford not to retrofit. An EnerPHit retrofit is currently underway at Niddrie Road on the south side of Glasgow. This new project is a deep retrofit of a standard tenement consisting of 8 one-bedroom flats in a neighbourhood close to Pollokshaws Road. This will see the tenement taken back to its bare bones and then upgraded with 21st century energy efficiency solutions.
So one of the particular things about a tenement and any really traditional building is that ideally what we need to do is put insulation around the outside, like a tea cosy. That's what we want to do, technically speaking. But we all know that we don't want to cover all the beautiful stone buildings in Scotland in insulation and render. So where it matters that we can see the stone walls, we put the insulation on the inside, and you can see that behind me. This is vapor open insulation on the inside of the walls, so that what you see from the street is a normal stone building. So what are the problems we're trying to fix? One of them is that there isn't enough insulation in most buildings. So people have sometimes rather half-heartedly put a bit of insulation in. The other thing that happens quite a lot and is a problem is that insulation doesn't meet. So you've done one bit, you've done a bit there, you've done a bit there, but you haven't done the bit in between. And the analogy, which is simplest to use, is holes in a bucket. So what we're doing in Passive House and EnerPHit is we're closing off those holes so that you really do keep all the heat in. The other thing is drafts. About 40% of your heat loss, 40% of your fuel bills is drafts. This plaster has been used across the whole of the outside of the building to stop air getting in from the beginning. So there isn't cold air floating around inside the building. When you close off a building like this, I think most people intuitively think, oh, it's going to be stuffy. But that isn't the case, because what we do is we introduce high quality ventilation. And so you have a nice fresh atmosphere inside the house without losing all the heat. And lastly, what we find is that the windows are almost always the weak point. I mean, they're just a couple of panes of glass. It stands to reason heat gets out of them. It gets in too, but what we're trying to do is strengthen that weak link. So we put a huge amount of time and trouble into getting the best possible windows and installing them in the wall in the best possible way.
We've got 8 properties here at Niddrie Road that are getting retrofitted to EnerPHit standard. So rather than just your typical tenemental refurb, where you might do a kitchen and bathroom and a heating upgrade, there's a lot more works involved. EnerPHit is the passive house equivalent for refurbing buildings, and it's all to do with reducing the space heating demand in properties. So if you've got a passive house or an EnerPHit property, you shouldn't really need much additional to heat the property. This is the first EnerPHit job that we've been involved with. We're involved in some big passive house jobs previously and currently on site, and it's certainly a standard either way that's coming more to the fore with the change in government regs, more emphasis on carbon, and certainly reducing demand for heat and fuel poverty as well.
It's very energy efficient. You're looking to get down to a point where you're something like between a fifth and a tenth of a normal building. So people who might have spent £100 a month on their heating will move into here and, broadly speaking, might only be spending £10, £15 a month. And that's a huge difference.
The requirements here were to look at an energy efficiency upgrade to 3 multi-storey blocks of flats. The buildings were from the 1960s, which predates the addition of insulation to the building regulations. So the buildings were cold, drafty, unaffordable to heat, and issues with mould. The brief there to do the energy efficiency gave us some opportunities to look at going beyond compliance, looking at standards where we're minimising the energy demand as much as technically possible, so reducing down the energy demand by, say, 80%. We've been using the Passive House EnerPHit methodology to guide that process and ensure that the quality assurance is taken as far as we can through the construction. We had existing precast concrete cladding panels. We need to make sure that the building is made as airtight as possible, so you're not getting infiltration, energy losses of wind, especially on the high rise, 22 stories. So we've put a nice warm insulated jacket of insulation on the outside of the building, covered it in a mineral render. And we've been very careful to make sure that all of the junctions that insulation meets, there's continuity of insulation. So where it meets a window, all of these details need real careful consideration.
The triple glazing is amazing. It's the heating, to tell you the truth, my heating's never on. And they've got the ventilation system. So the only time you open your windows is to wash them, really.
Retrofitting obviously is much more cost effective than demolishing a new build. It's also obviously very good in the climate emergency in terms of embodied carbon emissions. As long as the structure is sound, it makes sense. It becomes much more challenging, obviously, when you've got a historic listed facade that you need to keep.
The property at Niddrie Road is owned by Southside Housing Association and is a demonstration pilot project for the wider Glasgow City programme to retrofit its traditional sandstone tenement stock.
We have 2,500 houses in the south side of Glasgow, and about 1,000 of those would be pre-1919 tenements, which bring a particular challenge to trying to improve the energy efficiency and insulation standards to deliver warm, affordable homes to our tenants. We've got a really innovative partnership with Glasgow City Council, which is aimed at improving the management and maintenance of the inner city sandstone tenement stock. This is a particularly unique project though, because we've ended up with the ownership of the whole tenement, and that gave us an empty building and opportunities to experiment on how could we make a real difference to the insulation and heat efficiency standards. As an opportunity arose, the council directed me towards a Scottish Funding Council application process, which was around evaluating solutions to meet net zero targets in buildings in Scotland. And from that, I worked very successfully with Ken Gibb at the University of Glasgow, and we developed the evaluation study, and on the back of that we were able to increase interest from the Scottish Government and the Council to give a more generous funding package, which allowed us to do a much more optimum insulation standard to the building. I think it brings very close to the local community a very practical solution to the stuff they're hearing about in the news all the time. So we're hearing about energy efficiency, we're hearing about all these protests about saving the planet. We're here on our doorstep and we have the community engaged on a really practical solution to a housing challenge or a housing problem, but actually one that has ramifications for the city and for the Scottish nation, because our tenements are a huge part of our housing stock.
This is not something that has been funded in this way before. Glasgow City Council are doing this as a pilot project. It's very much a one-off. Working with Southside Housing Association. So we are putting in a little over half of the funding. Southside Housing Association are using private finance to fund the remainder. Scottish Government have since come on board and they are funding some of the renewables in the project. The most important thing for this project is what can we learn from it? We want to know what learning we can take from this project and replicate it across the rest of. We've got 70,000 pre-1919 tenement properties in the city. What can we take from this project to put into those properties? Now, I accept that we might not be able to do it all, but there'll be bits that we can take from this project that will be really good learning for those other flats.
I think it's something that there's a lot of features that will happen in a lot of properties, but there'll always be a balance between cost and value. So it's trying to understand where the money's best spent. There's a lot of features in this that might not be used in other properties, but again, there's a lot of features that probably will be. It's about understanding the capital cost versus the running cost, what it does for CO2 emissions, and trying to find what that sweet spot is. It's challenging in that some of the stuff is different. So it's always the same. People get used to what they're doing and like to do what they're used to doing. Reaching that level of air tightness is more than we're used to new build jobs. MVHR systems, you don't fit them very often. Air source heat pumps, whilst they'll definitely be started to become to the fore over the next few years as gas boilers get phased out. Again, it's a new challenge for us to build here. A lot of things are the same, but there's a lot of wee things that are adding on, and it's just getting into people's mindset. That just don't do what you had before. There's a reason why we're doing things that we're doing here to reach the standard that we're looking for.
We've also made it harder for ourselves in some ways because we're not only trying to do extremely energy efficient buildings, we're also trying to deal with the maintenance and the building heritage and the fabric. And we also are working to make sure that the building's healthy for people who live in it. So we have, again, made it more difficult for ourselves by using more natural materials, which can be more expensive. On the other hand, we can also save money. So, for example, one of the initial surveys that was done recommended that there was about £20,000 worth of chemicals to be sprayed, toxic chemicals, to prevent mould and rot. And instead of doing that, we got an expert in to find another way of doing it. And what we've actually done is we've been able to safeguard the building against decay without using any chemicals. And those chemicals would have seeped into the air and affected people's health. So it's energy, it's comfort, it's maintenance and heritage, but it's also the health of people living in the building.
Most of the stakeholders involved in housing want to find a solution to our problematic but iconic housing stock. They're a really important part of what makes Glasgow and Edinburgh and Dundee and Aberdeen the cities that they are. They're also really important as neighbourhoods. They're high density, they're very livable, they're very popular, but however, they have lots of challenges and issues. The Scottish Funding Council announced what's called a climate emergency competition, where they agreed to fund a couple of projects. And talking to Patrick McGrath, we decided that we'd like to put a bid in for it. So we built a team which involved the architects and the construction firm, but we decided to build a more cohesive, comprehensive evaluation, which would involve different strands and would also bring in other academics such as Tim Sharp from the University of Strathclyde, and also would ensure that there was a kind of cost-benefit analysis done as well. So the idea was that we would be able to demonstrate to the council that supporting this kind of project, a deep EnerPHit style retrofit, would provide lessons for the wider retrofit strategies for the 76,000 tenements in the city.
Our bit of the research is actually measuring performance. One of the really significant challenges in construction in general is that we hardly ever go back and measure how buildings are actually working in practice, which means we never know if things have worked or not. It's nuts. So that's what we're going to do here. We're going to put in quite a lot of monitoring and evaluation just to see how the thing works in practice. And that's interesting because that's a test of both, in a sense, the technical innovations, but it's also insights into how people use that building and what it means to them and comfort and usability and so on. What we are hoping to demonstrate is that this is a workable model, that this produces very good results. One of the problems with the current sort of building standards is it doesn't produce good results. There are significant performance gaps. So what this will do is demonstrate that this actually works, that it does what it says on the tin. What it will also do is give us some insights if it isn't doing that. So if it's not performing, it will allow us to do some tweaking or some further investigation to see, is there something which didn't work, needs to be fixed? And a big part of that is, what do we do next time? How do we feed that into the next iteration of this? How do we learn from our results? And that's novel here, because that's not something which happens normally in buildings.
Where the project currently stands is that the construction firm is on site, so it's a building site at the moment. It's really great that when we started this in the autumn of 2019, we had aspirations to achieve this EnerPHit standard, and here we are now, two years on, and we've no reason to think we won't achieve that EnerPHit standard, which will be a first for tenement housing in Glasgow.
But this project isn't just about reducing carbon emissions. The quality of homes our people live in has a marked impact on everything that they do. Better, warmer homes plays a vital role in reducing fuel poverty and increasing affordable warmth for all our city's residents. And it ensures that our tenemental heritage and legacy is protected for generations to come in the most sustainable way possible.